Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacey and Phil Thompson.
And thanks for joining us today. I'm Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacey.
Good to be with you on another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. And we are a tech company called JSL Solutions. We help churches, we help ministries with answers to their problems.
We do.
Any problem you have, we can answer it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Being facetious. We do like to help churches. We've been doing this since 2001, and we have products like streaming video, mobile apps, content management system, website templates. And for more information on that, just hang around. We'll tell you.
All right. What are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about something that's not necessarily totally tech-related, although it could be indirectly. One of the most important things for your church or ministry are the people that help volunteer. And it's the lifeblood of any organization.
Yes. And
the problem is, what happens is we get volunteers, and then after a while, they tend to kind of burn out many times. They leave, they quit, they get disillusioned.
This is very timely. My wife is just resigned from one of her duties, so she's kind of burned out on
at
what
church?
She's been doing,
Again? She resigned again?
Yeah, I guess she's been doing it for 20-something years, so...
Right. Well, that was always children.
She's taking a little break.
That was always children's ministry, right?
Yes.
Okay. I thought she quit a long time ago.
Well, she was the children's director for a long time, but now she teaches one of the classes.
Okay.
And so
she resigned from that.
She resigned. She realized that, she said, when I'm not looking forward to it and actually dreading when I'm assigned to participate, that she probably ought to take a break.
Well, that's probably good.
But that's what we're talking about, burnout. She's pretty much burnt out on it.
Yeah, I mean, there are times people do quit for lots of different reasons. They move on, they get a different job, their schedule changes or something. They go, I don't know, family moves and they go. But there are people that quit for completely preventable reasons. And maybe like your wife, they're worn out. They don't like what they do or whatever. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of these symptoms and how you and I can fight them. Because, again, this is important for any church or any ministry.
Yeah, so 13 ways? Is that what we're doing?
13 ways at this point. See how far we get. 13
ways that we can prevent volunteer burnout.
Exactly. So the first thing that we would encourage you to do is share the impact that your volunteers have on the ministry.
Yes.
That's number one.
Yeah.
So again, one of the best ways to remind people why they're doing why they do really matters is to show them some results of their work. And that can be hard at times because sometimes it's intangible. Sometimes you don't always see everything happening. But if you've got you hear somebody that shares a testimony or something positive about their experience with your church, it's always good to share that with your volunteers.
Yes, or you could play that song. What is that song? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have no idea what you're talking about, but I can't wait to hear it now.
There's a song that was really popular. It's probably a long time ago, but it talks about how this guy meets, he's died and gone to heaven, and he's running into his Sunday school teacher that led him to the Lord. And,
oh, gosh.
Yes.
Bolts was his name. Was it Ray Bolts?
I think you're right, yeah. Talking about how the Sunday school teacher completely changed his life.
Yeah. Ray Bolts' lifestyle has changed quite a bit since then, but we won't get into that right now. Well, look, I mean, imagine your church without greeters, right? How would newcomers and visitors feel if they walked in the door and nobody greeted them? So greeters are important. Ushers are important. Imagine if you didn't have volunteers, running some of your presentations.
Yes.
Pro presenter, media shout, or even streaming video, which is what we do. If you didn't have volunteers helping with those things or running sound, I mean, it would definitely leave an empty spot in your service. Imagine that, if nobody in your church volunteered to play or sing on the choir or the worship team, right? So those kind of things, it's important to remind people that they really are making a difference. And, if you do that, that really helps encourage volunteers.
Yes.
It's a thankless job sometimes. So the next one, number 2, give your volunteers plenty of rest.
Yes, and that may mean some time off, right?
That's what rest, I would say, would be. Look, and again, I'm sure there's people listening to this going, well, yeah, but if I take time off or if I ask somebody to take some time off, who's going to fill the position?
Yes.
That's hard.
You'd have to recruit so that you can set up some rest. I know that, one of the things that we did at our church was we moved, we have life groups, we call them life groups, cell groups, small groups, whatever. And we moved to a seasonal life group rather than a perpetual forever life group, which we had in the past. Yeah. So now we will meet for, it actually coincides with the school season. So when school's in, we're in, and when school holidays are out, then we're not meeting. Yeah. And I think it makes a big difference. You can, you can, take off over the Christmas break, and you have summers off. You kind of, towards the end of the summer, you're like, I'm looking forward to going back to. Sure. So designing in some rest for some of your long-time volunteers. Like my wife, I guess, she's not done forever, but she's just taking a break.
Sure.
So.
Well, and it's understandable. And again, you have to be intentional. So if you're leading teams, whether you're a key volunteer that leads other volunteers or you're on staff, you've got to be intentional about that. And I'm glad to hear that your life groups finally took my advice that I offered them 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah?
So, my church does that. We take breaks. But we meet for 6 weeks, and then we break.
Oh.
And it's easier on the host, and it's easier on everybody. And like you said, it's, you look forward to seeing people later, instead of seeing them every week and whatever. So, but figure out a way to give some rest, even if it's maybe just a weekend or 2 at a time.
Right.
It's better than nothing. And if you, really incorporate that as a leader, communicate something to your volunteer like, hey, this guy really does care, or this gal really does care about me. All right, let's move on here, shall we?
We shall.
What's the third one?
What is our third one? Distribute knowledge.
Distribute knowledge.
What does that mean?
Sounds like it's a pretty sterile term. Well, I guess what it means is this. Encourage your volunteers, especially some of those that are more experienced, to maybe break out of their mold a little bit and learn some other things, other multiple roles, share about what other people are doing, other volunteers. It will break up the monotony for some volunteers.
Yeah, so you want to have these people knowing how to do multiple positions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Give them, some understanding of how things work. And your first thought is, well, there's one more thing you're going to have to do. Well, no, not necessarily. We're not telling you to do this, and learn this, but maybe switch things up. And you probably need to do this with people that are a little more experienced in this area of volunteering. But the truth is, it breaks up the monotony. That's the only word I can think of offhand. And if if they can learn a little bit about what some of the other teams do, it may not be a perfect fit for them, but it might be still a good experience.
And it'll help reduce some stress too, because if you're the only one that knows how to run this, that means I got to be there because nobody else knows how to make that thing happen. Right. So if you're there in that role, teach somebody else how to do what you're doing, and so that if you're not there. It's not the end of the world.
It's really, it gives you the opportunity to show your volunteers that they really can lean on each other and you when they need to. All right. So
Number four,
appreciate your volunteers. Cannot say this enough. Probably should be the number one on the list. Appreciate your volunteers. Look, we know that you really can't completely compensate your volunteers for everything that they do because they're volunteering, and it's something that people need to hear appreciation. And we're not talking compensation as far as money, but we're talking about, things you can do to show appreciation. Little notes, maybe little emails, even a text message saying, hey, I appreciate what you did today for the church or what you did last week. Little things like that. I mean, you could even go a little more and create maybe a little time, a little party once in a while, maybe a get together, that where people can kind of, could be anything. Could be just a time to get some ice cream together, something like that. And
there's ways to roll a few of these into one. I mean, you can, in appreciating someone, let them know what their impact has been. So,
absolutely.
Say, this person's life was changed, and it's because of you. We appreciate that. Yeah,
absolutely. But again, appreciation, just can't say enough about it, because even if you got people that are like, I don't do this for appreciation, it still is good to hear it. And All
right, number 5.
Build a volunteer community. And this may sound like a lot of work, but the truth is, community is what really, to me, keeps a church going. And I mean community where people connect with each other, they are friends with each other, they do things together when they can. And, a team that really, what's that old saying, a team that plays together stays together. Mm-hmm. It's if you can do some things where you build community, build relationships. I know we're all busy. We've got soccer. We've got all these events going on. But if you can schedule something and create some opportunity for relationships, it will go a long way in helping volunteers avoid burnout.
Right. And it'll reduce some stress as well if they become friends. I know that, maybe some volunteers are like, Jody, she's always shows up here 3 minutes before the thing has to start, and she, how come they're not here at 20 minutes before when everyone else is here? And so there's typically not a relationship there with Jody, where if you did that relationship, you could either understand the situation or correct the situation.
Yeah, I mean, Jody may have reasons. She may have 4 kids that she's trying to get out of the house. I don't know, but building relationship, building community, it's a real key to helping your volunteers. Enjoy what they do, keep them from burnout, and help them to be more productive.
Yes. So number 6 on our list is provide clear goals.
Clear goals. I think this is important, and it's important to not just do it once, but to remind people what the goals are, because goals sometimes do change a little bit. They get modified, but to remind people, goals give volunteers direction. They help them direction for growth. It helps them to really understand where they're going, where they're headed. It can help your ministry get more out of the volunteers and help the volunteers be motivated to give more.
Right.
So it's really important. And a lot of times especially if you're a leader, and even if you're a person on staff, you probably understand your goals. Hopefully you do. But many times we don't communicate those things because we think, well, we know them, so everybody else must know them, right? Or, hey, I told them once 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. I told them what the goals were. But, everybody's at a different point in life.
Right.
So they need to be reminded. And I think there's ways to do that. And again, like you just said earlier, there's ways to even combine some of these things we're talking about where, where there's times together, groups together, sharing a goal or something it's very important, I think, to helping volunteers.
Plus, it should help break the monotony of a particular task. If they have growth goals for, their role in doing whatever, then they'll be able to move up the chain there and kind of.
Well, yeah, and if they feel like they're learning and growing too, that makes a difference.
Right.
It makes a big difference for people, especially if they're doing something and they've got something in mind for the future. So.
All right, number 7, prevent burnout. Don't react to it.
Yeah, and this is typically what happens here for most of us. We tend to react to things. And that's kind of what this goal is of this podcast today is look, let's instead of just always reacting to things, let's look at some proactive measures we can take to alleviate burnout, to help volunteers going through difficult times.
Right.
Because probably by the time they're burning out, it's like too late.
Yes, I think they've already made their mind up. They've gone through the decision process. They've already talked to a bunch of different people. By the time they let you know, which is one of the last people they want to let know, they're pretty much set on taking another route. So if you follow some of these other 12 steps, you should be able to prevent that.
I think so. And, again, you can't prevent every volunteer from burning out. It happens. Most aren't going to stay for life. But if you're proactive about fighting burnout, you really kind of pay attention to how volunteers feel about their roles, and you're more connected to them. You can head off some of this stuff.
Yeah. All right, number 8, come prepared every time.
I'm thinking of my music director who used to have a problem with this and still does a little bit. She would show up, but she didn't have the music pulled, or she wasn't totally clear on what she was doing. And I love her to death. She's awesome. But, being prepared, not her strength, I think she's doing much better now. Hopefully she's not listening to this podcast. But if you're leading a team and you're not, when whatever you're doing on your team, whatever the event is, whatever the activity is, and you're not really prepared, for a service, you frustrate the people around you.
Yes. If you're the one in charge and you're not prepared,
right,
and they're all ready to go do their thing, but you're not straight on what needs to be done, then it just can get really frustrating.
Yeah, because your volunteers, you might be a volunteer yourself, but maybe you're overseeing some other volunteers. Your volunteers, some of them, they got to get babysitters, they've got a plan, they got to leave early to get there, to the church or something. And when you show up late or unprepared, it can make the other volunteers feel like, you don't really care, do you? You don't really understand what we're going through. And I personally think it's rude. Now, I understand it happens. Things happen. Sometimes you get, tripped up and you may not always be prepared. But if it's happening on a regular basis, to me, that's rude, And so keep that in mind, treat people like you would want to be treated. So being prepared, if you're leading a team, be prepared. And that will help your volunteers. It won't get them so frustrated.
All right. Okay, number 9, remind them why they serve.
Again, this ties in with something we talked about earlier, but people volunteer for a lot of different reasons. And some of those reasons could be like spiritual growth or just a desire to serve God. That can help volunteers stay plugged in for a long time. But other reasons, people have things like, I want to meet new people, I want to make friends. That may not always keep them going when things get tough. And so you want to really remind people, identify the reasons. Hey, here's why we're doing what we're doing.
Right. Or these volunteers may be serving, what you want to do is understand the reasons why they're volunteering.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
true.
Remind them of their, particular reasons.
Yeah.
You want to do this for, XYZ, and you're doing a great job with it. And
So, you don't want to bring guilt. You want to encourage people, but you want to just, again, remind them, hey, here's why we're doing what we're doing. And so it kind of gets down to really knowing your volunteers, which we'll talk about in a moment, and paying attention to how they respond, those kind of things.
All right, number 10.
Number 10. This can be a tough one, but I think it's so important. Find a mentor for every volunteer. Find a mentor for every volunteer. So one of the single greatest ways you can help a volunteer grow is to get them a mentor. So whether that's more of it's a more experienced volunteer, maybe somebody on staff like yourself, if you're a staff person, a pastor, or another member of the congregation who enjoys developing relationships. There are probably some people in your church right now who are more capable of mentoring, but they either don't know it or they haven't been given the opportunity, and they just need a little nudge. So I'd encourage you to find some ways to share this need with your congregation. It's someone else's spiritual growth opportunity. It really can help people grow to have mentors in their life.
Right. I know one of the things that we do at our church for new volunteers is their first few Sundays they will shadow whoever they're going to be working with, which is kind of a way of introducing them to what that role is going to be and what's expected. But getting a mentor for once they're in place may be just cross-connecting different volunteers within your set of volunteers. So, one that's a little further down the road than the other.
And I think it helps those who, even the people on the other end of the coin, those who are doing the mentoring, it can help them as well, help them grow and help them connect with people and keep them around.
All right. We're cruising. So number 11, pray for your volunteers.
Yeah, I know this should be obvious, but again, we get busy and we may pray for our own needs or our own family, but if you, especially if you're leading a team, pray for your volunteers. Again, your volunteers are partners in the ministry. They're brothers and sisters that you work with. So pray for them, pray for their families, pray for their personal ministries. And again, I would say, give them opportunity if you can do it correctly. Let them express their needs to you. And maybe make an opportunity. Hopefully you meet with your volunteers, which we can talk about here in a moment, on a semi-regular basis. I would include times of prayer request, if people feel the liberty to share. Somehow or another, you want to build a connection there where they feel liberty to share what's going on, and then you take the opportunity to pray for them, maybe in person or maybe just in your quiet time.
Mm-hmm. All right. And number 12, train them well.
Yeah, and this goes without saying. We kind of touched on this, but training is important because, when you try something new or do something new and you don't fully understand how to do it, you develop bad habits, and it can be very frustrating if you're a new volunteer. Training, there are some people that will take this and develop manuals for whatever ministry they're in, which I would say is a good thing. Not everybody reads the manuals, but I think if you can train people well on how to do what they're doing, it's one of the best ways to proactively fight volunteer burnout. So again, some of this stuff takes a little bit of time on your part if you're leading a team, but it's worth it in the long run because you're going to help people do what they're doing better. They're going to feel better about it because, when a volunteer doesn't completely understand what they're doing, many times they're going to do it wrong, and then they'll get flack from somebody on it. Maybe not from you, but maybe one of the other leaders in the church, or somebody else will give them criticism. Well, you should wait till the song plays for another minute before you take the offering because people need time to write out their checks or fill out their connection cards. If you don't train them to wait and do things right and they hear criticism, right, what's their feelings? Like, oh, great, nobody cares. Nobody appreciates what I do. So training people is important. It takes time, but again, if you want people to hang around for a while and not burn out, it's a key.
Yes. And then our last one on our list here.
Know your team. And again, this comes back down to building community, building relationships. Every single one of these techniques that we just talked about for fighting burnout depends on you, if you're leading a team, to know your team. And if you don't have the capacity to get to know the people who serve with you, or maybe there's too many volunteers to manage, then you need to delegate a little bit and assign some leadership roles to some other people. Because otherwise, you're missing out. You're going to miss the signs of burnout. You're going to miss people. There are people maybe on your team that are hurting. They're discouraged. They're going through something personally. And part of what we're talking about here is ministry. And it's not just let's get the job done so we can grow the church, but it's also let's connect with each other to help each other. Help each other grow and get closer to God and build relationships. So knowing your team, again, takes a little bit of energy on your part. May have to delegate, but it's a key to building your church and building a healthy ministry.
So that's our list here. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I know, what's your most frustrating volunteer event? What's your pet peeve? Do you have any pet peeves with?
Personally, with my church, we've really, with the help, I actually kind of took this on where I had ushers and greeters that were just scattered all over the place, and I actually had somebody else, another volunteer, take it on. Made a big difference. Mm-hmm. So even though I do a little part-time role as an executive director of a small church, I only do it part-time. So it's frustrating for me sometimes when I see things not, volunteers not either not fulfilling what they're supposed to do right, or we need more of them. And so I have found it's finding the right people is very important. And it's not on this list, but if there's any way you can incorporate some kind of a spiritual gifts testing, there's people out there like Rick Warren and others that have put together some great material on how people can learn what their giftings are. And that helps them fit in to an area of ministry so they're not frustrated doing something that doesn't fit them. Mm-hmm. But for me, when I had one of my key people took on the area of ushers and greeters, made a huge difference. People showed up on time. People knew what they were doing. We had very little roles where in the past it's like, hey, where's our ushers? We got to do something, Mm-hmm. And so I would be dragging people, pulling people out of the congregation to do something. What about you?
I was just trying to think back on probably my pet peeve was going to meetings that had no real purpose or agenda that was around some volunteer spot. And I'm just thinking, I'm making time out of my weekend or week or whatever, and I go to this thing and I'm like, did we really need to do that? So that gets me frustrated. That's just one of the frustrating things. That I'm like,
Well, and it goes back to, making sure, if you're leading a team, what we mentioned earlier was, make sure you're organized, you have a goal in mind.
Yeah. Because, a lot of times I think people that are leading, teams say, oh, let's get everybody together and let's, do X, Y, or Z. And as a volunteer, I'm thinking, wow, this is a big commitment for me to show up again for this thing that's not completely related. Right. I don't know. I'm just remembering, I don't remember any specifics, but I just remember frustrating going, why did I even come to this?
Well, here we're wasting time.
Yes.
Well, and that's always good to keep in mind. If you're listening to this podcast and you lead teams or lead people, make sure you
respect their time, not only while they're doing their job, but in between. So,
absolutely. So. Yeah, it's important stuff. But all right, if you've got some feedback on this, folks, or on us, you please give us your opinion on some of these things. Just send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. That's one of our domains. We do streamingchurch.tv and churchapplive.com and myflock.com. And again, I can't stress that volunteers are a huge part of any ministry, so we need to take care of them as best as we can. So hopefully this has helped. All right, so that's Steve Lacey across the table. I'm Phil Thompson. Again, we'd love to hear from you. And until next week, I hope that you have a great week, a great day, and catch us again for another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. Take care.